The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. A couple of years ago, I was dating a woman named Lynn. She was deeply enthusiastic about alternative medicine. It was such a strange obsession in every other aspect. She was insightful and critical. Hell, she was a paralegal. She just had this one blind spot that I could never figure out, and it was a big part of her life. We were together for 2 years. During that time, she had me try all kinds of strange treatments and experiences, things like acupuncture, spirit healing, crystals, Reiki, rolfing, and even a seance. I may or may not have been asked to do ayahuasca. I went along with it because I cared deeply for her, but the cracks in our relationship had started to show. Turned out we wouldn't last in the long run. But I don't want to talk about that relationship. I want to talk about this one treatment she took me to, and how it has shaped the life I'm living today. It's a bit complicated. I'm going to talk about step-minding. It was an early Minnesota morning, and the last session that Lynn and I would attend as a couple. We pulled into a nondescript parking lot, and Lynn led me by the hand. We'd had an insane fight that morning about something I can barely remember. I think it was the order you put in your yogurt when eating muesli. Of course you put the muesli in first, right? It's like cereal. We entered a stale waiting room. The AC must have been off for days. I could taste the air. The only other person there was a short, balding man who spoke to us in a vaguely European accent, barely looking up from his iPad. "Stevenson's?" he asked. "Overexposure is room 4. "No, that's not us," I said. "We're..." Right, sorry," he sighed. "Wrong day." He tapped the screen a couple of times and nodded. "Step-minding couples treatment, still room 4. "Thank you." He wandered off, and I noticed he didn't have any shoes on. I pointed it out to Lynn, who elbowed me. She thought I was being judgmental. I just thought it was strange. I didn't want to start anything. She vehemently disagreed with my assessment, as always. We walked up to room 4. The door was already open. It was a plain, windowless room with a small coffee table surrounded by 4 basic office chairs. There was a vase with a single blue sunflower. There was a naked light bulb overhead with nothing covering it. The floor was covered in a plain grey carpet. There was a little note on the door that urged us to take off our shoes. Lynn just smiled at me. As if this explained everything, I rolled my eyes. We sat down across from one another and waited. It didn't take that long before a woman wandered in. She was in her 40s, wearing a sort of knitted white wool caftan. She had a combed-back flat Elvira-looking hairdo and covered herself in rings, chains, and bangles. She shook our hands, smiling widely. "I'm Dr. Bogan," she assured us, "but please call me Jane." I wasn't feeling all too confident about what we were about to do. Jane described the procedure. Step-minding was a way to connect to one another in a new way, giving a better understanding of what it's like to walk a mile in their shoes. There were a couple of rules to remember before we started. For example, once the treatment started, we couldn't get up from our chairs. If we did, we'd get horribly nauseous. Also, we had a sort of safety noise. If someone were to snap their fingers 3 times in a sequence, that'd trigger a failsafe that brought us right back. All in all, it seemed odd, but not like nefarious. Then we began. Jane rhythmically snapped her fingers, like someone tapping their feet to a slow song. She spoke in a monotone voice, asking us to look down. "Look at your feet," she said. "Imagine the feeling of walking, the way your muscles contract and your knee bends. Think of how it makes you feel, and imagine the sound you think your body makes. I don't remember the exact wording of what she told us next, but I remember how it made me feel. Without moving, we were supposed to imagine standing up, stepping across and through the coffee table, and sitting down in the chair of the person on the other side, our spirit passing through them, occupying the same space. We were to imagine looking at ourselves through the eyes of the other. There was a breathing exercise following the rhythm of her finger snapping. We joined our breaths, and Jane made us focus on each part of our body, leading from our toes up to the top of our heads. She called it materializing. We kept our eyes on our feet. Except, slowly, they weren't my feet anymore. "Now look," Jane said. "Look at yourself." I was looking down at Lynn's feet, but not through my eyes. I have a hard time describing the first sensation of step minding. Jane's finger snapping stopped, and all of a sudden, I was looking up at, well, myself. I was sitting in Lynn's chair. I was, for all intents and purposes, experiencing the world as Lynn. I was Lynn. My hands were smaller, more delicate. I was colder, and my clothes were uncomfortable. Smell and taste felt different, and I had this gnawing hunger in the back of my stomach. My back ached, and I could feel my long hair reaching halfway down my back. I wasn't just looking at Lynn's feet, I was Lynn. I can barely remember what I did. We talked and touched each other's hands, reassuring one another that we were actually experiencing this. Lynn was repeating the same thing over and over. "That's me," she said. "I'm looking at me. You're me. I'm you." We had a long discussion. I could feel air reverberating through my throat in a strange way. I spoke with Lynn's voice, and it made my neck strain. I had to settle myself in her body, and there were so many details that just didn't click. It was so hard to focus on what was being said, when all I could think about was the way my earrings swung back and forth when I moved my head. But after about an hour, Jane snapped her fingers 3 times, and I was back in my chair in the blink of an eye. This is how I realized I was short-sighted. Lynn's vision had been perfect. I also felt bigger, heavier. Her world felt so different from mine, and while it didn't explain our disagreements, it gave me some insights into just how different we really were. I made a note to get new glasses. Still reeling from the experience, Lynn and I thanked Dr. Bogan and stepped out. We had a strange, disoriented talk in the parking lot, and broke up. It was oddly amicable, as if we both understood that we were fundamentally incompatible. That was it. No drama, just, that's it. I thought about that day for weeks. It was so surreal. I mean, how do you go from a literal out-of-body experience and back to work on Monday morning? You can't pretend that nothing happened. I wanted to understand it, like really understand it. I'd been to countless nonsensical treatments with Lynn, but this one had been the real deal. There was no denying it, even though I desperately tried to. A couple of weeks later, I returned to Dr. Bogan on my own. I wanted to talk to her about it, the science behind it, how it functioned, how it was performed, anything. And of course, how had I never heard of step minding before? I met her on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. She sat me down and had her assistant offer me a cup of coffee. She explained it as calmly as she could. It was complicated, but essentially, she explained it as something based on Raskian identity theory. The transfer of thought pattern through vocal mediation, exchanging vibrations and adapting electrical patterns in the brain. Every word sounded like nonsensical pseudoscience, but it didn't change the fact of what I'd experienced. And at the end of the day, that was the only thing that really mattered. "I have to see it again," I said. "I need to understand this." "Funny you should say that," she smiled. "I think we can work something out." Jane offered me a quid pro quo. She had a couple of patients who could benefit from a step-minding session, but she needed a neutral third party to act as the recipient. I seemed to be a good fit. I was skeptical. but she had a little bonus to sweeten the deal. She'd pay me a handsome sum of cash for each session as a kind of consultation fee. I was a bit hesitant, but I agreed. 1 week later, I sat in on a session with Jane and one of her patients. The patient had a dissociative issue and needed a step-minding session to alleviate a strange obsession she seemed to have with what sounded like a houseplant. I didn't pay too much attention. I was nervous. I couldn't figure out why. Maybe it was the thought that what I'd experienced was real, and how that would force me to change the way I viewed the world. If a thing like step-minding exists, who's to say there aren't ghosts or wizards? So I sat down with this stranger, and Jane started snapping her fingers. "Now look," she began, "look at yourself." Jane used the same words, the same sequence, the same rhythm, stepping out of my body and into another, but the difference was palpable this time. Lynn had been calm and collected, but this woman was the opposite. Sitting in her body, my pulse was higher. My legs were shaking, and my breathing was shallow. I was physically exhausted, but mentally wired. Thoughts rushing 100 different ways at once, and I didn't even know why. A single second in that body, looking across my table back at myself, and I could tell they were a troubled person. I was to sit there for a while as Jane had a discussion with the other patient. Instinctively, I stood up to leave the room, to give them privacy, but I had to sit back down. My head started spinning as all these unfamiliar muscles reacted to my input, and I couldn't get very far. Perhaps the sitting down rule was there for a good reason. I sat there, trying to calm down, while the two of them had a discussion. I was asked to put on headphones for a bit, and I didn't mind. It was hard hearing anything through my pounding pulse anyway. As the session came to an end, Jane snapped her fingers, and I was back in my chair. My heart rate was slower. I wasn't shaking. I was nervous, but compared to the other patient, I was an obelisk of relaxation. For a moment, looking across the table, I could see her taking a deep breath. She was still shaking, but not as much as when we started. Perhaps that session gave her a new perspective on things. As the patient left, I got a moment to talk to Jane alone. I explained to her that if we had wheelchairs instead, the other patient could be rolled out during the session. That'd be more effective than using headphones. She really liked that idea, and suggested we'd try it at the next session, which inadvertently answered my next question. There was going to be more sessions. I worked on and off with Dr. Bogan for a couple of months. I usually did about 3 to 5 sessions per month, netting me a bonus income of about $400 per session. Jane ended up getting 2 wheelchairs and having her assistant, Jonathan, wheel me out while she had a conversation with the other patient. I grew accustomed to it and started to enjoy the sensation. It's sort of a pleasant ego death. You feel more connected to the world. It was becoming a steady source of secondary income, taking an afternoon off work to get paid for something that I ultimately enjoyed. Yeah, not a bad deal. Over the upcoming weeks, I got a couple more opportunities. I joined Jane on a couple of out-of-town sessions, meeting some clients she was following up on. Mostly folks who need privacy for one reason or another, folks with all kinds of strange afflictions. I could probably write a book about those people alone. Coming back home, Jane contacted me about doing a couple of sessions where she wasn't personally involved. I was also asked to be the guide a couple of times, seeing as how I'd step-minded so many times and could recite the guiding words by heart. The pay was more than doubled, so I agreed. I had 3 guiding sessions on my own, one with a hippie couple who wanted to experience a sort of intimacy. Let's just leave it at that. Another session with 2 brothers, performing a trust exercise. The third one was a group of college kids who wanted to debunk the whole thing, and they left sort of befuddled. All in all, things were going well. Then I got a call about being a neutral third party. I was going to perform a switch with a patient, but this time Jane wasn't involved at all. The customer went straight to me. It was a group of people who contacted me. They described it as their dad having a disorder, and that they wanted to try step-minding to sort of reset him. They'd arranged their own guide, so they just needed me as a neutral third party, someone who wouldn't freak out about the process, as it might take a couple of hours to get through to him. It would be my longest session yet, but the pay was good, and I'd tried a lot of things up until that point. I was ready. I met the client, Harold, at his home in southern St. Cloud. Big place, 3 floors, gated property with both a pool and a tennis court, modern architecture and heated floor tiles. The guide for the evening was a cheery woman in her 40s. She gave off a bit of a college professor kind of vibe. Apart from the client himself, there was a group of 4 other people who seemed to be close relatives, and of course there was Harold himself, the man I was supposed to work with. Harold was surprisingly upbeat. I couldn't see anything obviously wrong with him, which surprised me. From what I understood, he was in dire need of this treatment. He was a man in his early 60s but could easily pass for 50. Hell, the man had better teeth than me. I could tell he must have been a salesman at some point. You can tell by the smile. I was introduced to the others, who introduced themselves as friends and family. We hurried into the living room, where a space had been prepared. We were all seated as a group. The guide had prepared everything and offered me a reassuring smile. She took our hands, something that Jane usually didn't do. "I just want to make sure we're all feeling good about this," she said. "We good?" "We good," I nodded. "We're good," Harold agreed. And with that, the session was on. The guide snapped her fingers, lowered her voice, and took us down the mental road and across the table. By then, I knew the process. The right words, with the right cadence, at the right time. I sunk back in my chair, looking at my feet, and felt the world shift. After a while, my shoes looked different. They were nicer, and my pants fit me better. Slowly, I started to feel the reality of my borrowed body, the various aches and pains, the thinning hair, the wrinkles on my cheek when I blinked. I'd aged about 30 years in a couple minutes, and it would take some time adjusting. Looking up and seeing myself in the opposite chair, I got this anxious sting in my chest. The thought crossed my mind. What if I never returned? The guide excused herself and left. She'd done her job. The rest was up to Harold and his associates. But as soon as I heard the front door close, the air in the room shifted. Harold was sitting there, looking like me, stretching his arms. The others joined us, making a circle. One of Harold's associates, a young woman who'd introduced herself as Hope, spoke to the both of us. She could easily have been his daughter. "How you feeling?" she asked. "Everyone okay?" "Yeah," I nodded. "You do what you gotta do." "So this works?" Harold asked. This is it? It's done?" "It's done," Hope smiled. Harold pulled out a gun, a well-polished revolver. I was the only one who reacted, flinching at the sight of it. The others didn't seem to care. I didn't know what to do. Should I be scared? If so, why was no one reacting? "So we just cut the cord then," he said, "and we're good to go." "Wait, what are you—" They were tricking me. They put me in that old body and had no intention of putting me back. I held up my hand and snapped my finger 2 times. But before the 3rd snap, I had a gun pushed against the back of my head. "That won't help," Hope said. "We'll just kill you when you're you again." It's hard to describe what I felt in that moment. The fear was real, but there was also a longing to go back. Being out of your own body is like sleeping outside. You feel exposed and maladjusted. If you know it's just for a while, it's not that bad. But if there's a chance you can't go back, it becomes terrifying, like getting lost in the woods. That's not even counting for the primal terror you feel from having a gun pointed at you. Harold seemed a bit confused, which made me realize that no one had explained the rules to him, that we couldn't get up, and that 3 snaps of a finger would cancel the effect. I got the impression that he thought this was, somehow, permanent. Looking at him, I could see a worry spread across his face, my face. "You said this was permanent," he said, looking at Hope. "It is, as long as you don't do 3 finger snaps. How's that going to work when we cut him off?" "You're going to have to make sure you're never around someone who snaps their fingers, Harold." She smiled. "That's not too much, is it?" "Do I have to remind you that I got the tapes to put you away?" Harold snarled back. "And that if anything were to happen to me, you're done." "Nothing's going to happen, Harold," Hope chuckled. "Look, you're right there, safe and sound." She pointed at me. It was as if a light turned on in Harold's eyes. He was being double-crossed, just like me. In a desperate moment, he raised his handgun at me. I recoiled so hard that I fell out of my chair, feeling my heart skip a beat. Cold sweat spread across my arms, clinging to the thin inner fabric of Harold's expensive blazer. But there was no gunshot, just a click. His gun was empty. That click was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I came crumbling down to the floor, feeling the effects of the first rule: don't get up. I was immediately nauseous. I felt like a bobblehead as my head went one way and my body another. I collapsed in a pile, trying to find the magic number of blinks to make the world stop spinning. "You'll never get past the safety checks," Harold screamed. "You'll never get the backups. You..." "It's all fingerprinted," Hope sighed. "Fingerprinted, bio-coded, voice-checked. Sorry." A man raised his arm. There was no second click. Instead, there was a bang. I looked up with my ears ringing, watching a reflection of my dead self on the other side of the coffee table. Bullet to the brain. Nothing but blank eyes looking back at me. My face didn't look dead. It just looked sort of tired, like I was sleepy. I was expecting that face to blink, but that blink never came. Blood pooled at the corner of the mouth, running down from the open wound at the temple. They pulled me up and dragged me over to Harold's workstation. They used my hand to log in. I had to do a voice recognition check as Hope's associates went through 2 laptops and a smartphone. While they did, Hope sat down across from me. My head was still swimming. "We're going to need you," she said. "And as long as you play along, you will be fine. But if you fuck with me..." She snapped her fingers twice. Ice filled my veins as I gripped my seat. "I can't imagine something good would happen if we tried this," she said, lowering her voice. "So how about we just really pay attention?" She explained it to me. I was done for. Anyone in her crew could snap their fingers 3 times and I'd be done. This also meant I couldn't perform step minding again, as you need a rhythmic finger snapping as part of the process. She explained the plan. They needed Harold alive to slowly transfer his company's shares to someone else without it looking all too suspicious. They needed access to his files, both immediate and over a longer time. They explained that they needed me around to make it appear that everything was fine. In return, I'd get to live in this amazing place, with whatever comforts I could ask for the rest of my days. But if I slipped up, snap, 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 done, fade to black. It was so surreal, watching them wrap up my own body in black plastic, men in tailored blazers scrubbing the floors and walls with bleach. Hope sitting across from me, rubbing her fingers together. "Where do you think you'll go?" she asked. "If I snap my fingers, where do you think you'll go?" "I don't know," I stuttered. "I don't." "Maybe you'll be fine," she shrugged. "Maybe there's something nice and warm on the other side. Or maybe the snapping doesn't even work anymore. Want to try?" "No." "No," she smiled. "No, you don't. You're smarter than that. And maybe you're not the gambling type." She tapped the barrel of the gun on Harold's mahogany desk. "You can have all the parties you want. You got a big bank account," she sighed. "But maybe be careful about inviting musical people, those who stomp their feet or snap their fingers." And that was that. I was left there. I had keys to a place I didn't know, a phone full of numbers I didn't recognize. I just stood there in the chlorine-smelling house of a stranger. I didn't know what to feel. Ever since I first started step-minding, I had never considered this. It was unreal. I remember looking down at my own hand, not being sure if I could snap myself out of it. What would happen? Over time, I got used to the nausea. Nowadays, it's gone. I can walk around like anyone else, but I have to avoid crowds. I can't risk hearing those 3 snaps. I watch videos with the sound off and subtitles on. I only watch movies after checking the soundtrack, making sure there's no snapping in the songs. Radio is out of the question. You never know where you might hear it. And even if you do, does it work hearing it through a TV or in a song? Would you risk it? I won't. I can't. I don't think I can ever adjust. I've thought about contacting people from my old life, but I wouldn't know where to begin. How do you explain this? I have to be careful not to draw any attention to myself, or Hope and her cronies might return, and if they do, well, I don't know how far I can push my luck. I mean, I'm comfortable. Harold made close to 6 figures a month on passive income. I've learned most things about his life. He never married. He has no children, and most of his contacts are passing acquaintances at best. He was a lonely man, and now that's me. I've changed a couple of names in this story as to not make it too obvious who I am. Then again, even if I said it outright, I can't imagine it would matter. No one's going to believe this. How do you convince someone that you're really someone else? It just sounds schizophrenic. I spend most of my days considering my options. I've thought about destroying my hearing as a safety measure. Yes, going deaf is awful, but you have no idea what it's like living with the thought that a sound that can be done at any time, by anyone, can kill you. It's exhausting, and you end up isolating yourself. So I'm typing this out on a fancy laptop on a mahogany desk. I'm Harold now, screaming into the void that I used to be someone else. I'm sipping on a drink from a glass with my initials on it, and when I go to bed tonight, I will do the same thing I do every night. I will take a long look at myself. I got better vision now. Harold isn't short-sighted. But I can't look at myself. I'm not there anymore. It's just Harold. Over my years exploring abandoned and not so abandoned places, I've encountered my share of wild situations. Finding drug dens in old bank vaults, a raving hermit in an old Chuck E. Cheese, and a lot of still water will make you pretty resistant to weird shit. Hell, some friends and I even explored an old asylum from the 40s. Might have been the safest place we've ever visited. So when my buddy Caleb asked if I wanted to try getting into an old office building, I thought it wouldn't be a big deal. The place was 10 stories, with 2 wings that split off from a central entrance. For obvious reasons, I'm not disclosing where it is. But it was abandoned after a lot of the businesses either shuttered during COVID or just went to work from home only. Since then, the real estate company has been trying to rent it out to anything, even conventions. But this place apparently has some weird vibes that keep most people away. Caleb's always been more on the idiot side, to put it bluntly. He's not very bright, especially when it comes to his own adrenaline. Really just the perfect combination of reckless and stupid. Normally I would try to avoid going to too many places with him, but this being a relatively newer building made me think it was going to be safer. Built in '95 and shut down in 2020, couldn't be that dangerous, right? We went in at night, under cover of darkness so we didn't get caught. The front door only had a simple padlock on it, but Caleb was able to pick it up pretty easily. It only took a couple of minutes to slip right by and into the building. The lights were on, I'm assuming because of a timer. That wasn't too surprising. There wasn't any sign of a security guard though, with next to no other kinds of deterrents for those like us. Inside, the main lobby looks like it hasn't been updated since the place was built. It looked like it was going for 90s chic, with the square patterned carpet and relief lighting that made everything stupidly dim. "So where first?" I asked him, stopping in the lobby's center. A small desk was at the side of the door we entered through, covered in a decent layer of dust. 2 elevators Saturday on the wall opposite the doors, while the wings of the building split off diagonally from there. Long hallways with only minimal lighting. Might need our flashlights after all. Start from the top and work our way down, he replied, walking over to a sign by the elevator doors. Business names were still displayed with the floor numbers and rooms beside them, though there weren't that many there in the first place. B1 Electrical, B2 Storage, 1 Amazon Support, 2 Blank, 3 Smith Bros Security, 4 Molson's, I Space for Rent, 6 Better Tech Solutions, 7 Available, 8 Available, 9 Price Right Travel, 10 The Joy Factory. Dream Factory sounds like a good place to begin, I guess. Wonder if the elevators work, I said, stepping forward and pressing the up button. It lit up with a ding, light inside flickering with the effort. It only took a couple of minutes for the humming to stop along with the elevators in front of us. Both doors slid open at the same time, revealing both had lights out. Cool, good start. We took the one on the left, hitting the button for floor 10 as we huddled in. I brought out my flashlight to get a glimpse around, trying to see what shape this thing was in or if I should worry about dying in it. Wood panels on the side were sliding off, leaving gaps in the elevator where you could see the mechanisms as it rose. The humming sound from in here was more of a grinding, steel working hard against gears that had obviously been neglected for even longer than the building had been shut down. Even the stuffiness of the elevator wasn't enough to stop the chill I got on the way up. Looking around, shining my light on one of the cracks in the side, the steel beams holding up the elevator weren't the only thing passing by. For a brief moment, a face went past, right in front of the crack in the wall. Pale, white face with open mouth, eyes staring in wide-eyed, blank wonder through as we ascended. I dropped my flashlight while screaming profanities, making Caleb look at me strangely. "Holy shit, did you see that?" I asked him, but he only shook his head. "There was a fucking face in the elevator shaft, dude." Probably some prank, a mannequin or something shoved in between the beams. He shrugged it off, paying no mind as my heart was still beating out of my chest. Moments passed that seemed like days while I tried to control my breathing, desperately telling myself that it really was a prank. Ding! "Oh Jesus, fuck!" he shouted as soon as the doors opened, a huge, fuzzy monster staring us down from right across the 10th floor lobby. Dark, hollow eyes looked sunken in against the face, a snout protruding with a bright blue nose painted in front of whiskers. Caleb began to immediately press the button to close the doors, but the elevator wasn't responding. This idiot started to punch the damn button panel repeatedly, breaking it in. The beast across from us just stared back, a wide smile visible against dark purple fuzz. "Dude, I think that's a puppet," I said, my eyes adjusting better to the dim light. Walking forward, I reached a hand out to touch the thing, feeling hard plastic underneath the soft fuzz. Definitely creepy, but not going to kill us. He stumbled out of the elevator, giving the costume a solid punch in return for the scare. The puppet took another win, though, Caleb exclaiming in pain before grabbing his hand. "Hell with this place," he swore again, wringing his hand in the air. "It was your idea, man. This dude was just minding his own business until we came along," I said, turning to look down the hallway in both directions. Similar costumes were lining the halls on both sides, all with different defining features and colors. Most toward the front looked like hybrid suit puppets, kind of like Big Bird on Sesame Street. One person would probably be in the suit, while others controlled the features. Others were less stylized, resembling more human-like marionettes. "Oh my God, this looks like a furry workshop. Please don't tell me we found furry hell." "God, I hope not," he said, pushing the first one over onto the ground, spitting on it. "Fuck you, stupid-ass puppet." I'd be lying if I said this place wasn't one of the eeriest I've ever seen in my life. Most of the others actually had eyes. unlike the one when we came in. Felt like they were following me though, no matter where I turned. The dim hallway made their shadows cross in the path, making a lattice of darkness we were stepping through. This must be a wild amount of money just left to rot. Wonder where they went, I mentioned, shining my light around the low ceilings. Most of the rooms in the hallway were empty, blank beige walls with no decoration or sign they were ever used. Like people pay good money for these things. We could get a ton even for one. Maybe they're doing some Five Nights at Freddy's shit. Think one might come to life and try to stuff us in? He shot back, grinning. Hey, there's a light down there, you see it? Yeah, right at the end there, I confirmed, a blue light catching my eye through one of the doorways ahead. It was flashing slowly, without any kind of sequence or pattern. As we approached, a shadow moved from behind the door, briefly showing in the light. As soon as it appeared, it was gone. I don't like this place, man. Me either. Stairway is right there. Want to take it to the next floor? He asked as we approached the flashing light. I peeked around, trying to get a glimpse into the room as he barged right in. Oh my God. There was a mannequin standing in the corner, an unfinished suit on it. Bright red fur, large claws, and vacant, staring eyes were the main standouts. It looked like it wasn't completely finished, lacking many of the finer details a lot of the others had. The face was mostly blank, with no defining features like the whiskers or colors, just the bright red fur. In the other corner was a screen, a marionette handle dangling from the ceiling above it to hold up new puppets. So definitely a furry factory, I said, looking around the room for anything else. Some supplies were left on shelves nearby, with the bright blue light coming from a modem that was left plugged in. An alert light was sporadically flashing, making the suit look even more eerie. Something was reflecting from the vacant, unfinished eye holes on the suit. I moved closer, trying to get a good look at it. I still couldn't see with the flashing, so I finally lifted my light to the mannequin, shining it right in the eyes. Vacant, lifeless eyes stared back at me from within, with no color in them. The smell cut through as I got closer to it, rotten decay like meat left out in the sun. Fuck, I shouted, dropping my light and stepping back. I ended up moving into the corner, puking out whatever meager dinner I had eaten earlier. Caleb, curious about what got me, lifted the mask from the torso, revealing the body inside. Holy shit, he whispered, looking at the face of the body head on. I stood, wiping my mouth on my sleeve. The smell was permeating further through the room now, giving everything an underlying scent of decay. I'm not sure if it was male or female when it was alive. It was so emaciated to the point of barely having distinguishable features. Hair was thinning out on the head, waxy skin nearly glowing in the flashing lights. Is this real? Do you smell that? It has to be real, I said, holding a hand over my nose to block it out. That's a fucking body, man. We need to call the cops. Then we'll get in trouble, he said, looking from me to the body. I already have priors, I can't get arrested. So get out and I'll call them. Jesus, there might be a murderer around here. Think that's a little more important, I said, pulling my phone out. Punching in 911, I lifted it to my ear with no sound on the other end. I pulled it back down, trying to see what the deal was, but the call just wasn't going through. My battery was blinking red, 5% left. I charged this before we left. What the hell? It died almost instantly then, the call unable to complete. A sudden, raspy breath from behind the privacy curtain startled both of us away. The hell was that? Caleb asked, cautiously moving forward toward the curtain. He reached out a shaking hand, ready to pull it to the side and see what was there. The decaying body in the suit paid no attention to our terror. Strings on the marionette handle dangling from the ceiling began to bend and sway as something moved below. Another pained gasp emanated. Caleb tore back the curtain and jumped back like a snake was about to lunge at him. Behind it, we could finally see the terror that was gasping for breath. Another person. This time, held up by hooks in their skin, holding them above the ground as a dangling puppet. Their eyes filled with abject horror when the curtain flew back, likely thinking they were in for some sort of torture by whoever put them here. "Please," was all the frail puppet could offer before we ran from the room in fear, Caleb screaming as he went. The idiot ran down the hall the way we came, desperately banging on the elevator call button to no avail. As much as he was hitting the button, I'm surprised the panel didn't break. Maybe it did, since the elevator never came. It didn't matter. Before he could turn back to try for the stairs, the massive puppet across from the elevators, the same one that he had punched earlier, stepped off the platform it was on, walking toward him with arms wide. All I could do was run, desperately hoping to get away from whatever hell we had stumbled into. The stairlight was behind me, all the way back at the end of the hall. Caleb was screaming from behind me, begging whatever might be controlling the puppet to stop. It was a huge mistake, but I looked back. This puppet or costume or whatever the fuck it was had Caleb held up in the air by his neck. As he held him closer to the ceiling, I could see thin, wispy strands like a spider's web coming down from the tiles. It looked as if they were just appearing from the surface, falling right through toward Caleb, hooks materializing on the end. Caleb screamed through a crushed throat as the hooks pierced his skin, arms, legs, back, near any area with a joint that could be manipulated. The strings lifted him in the air, holding him high before beginning to move toward me. I was still a few feet away from the stairway, both Caleb's screaming body and the large beast coming my way. It wasn't until the last second that I finally burst through the fire door, desperately making my way down the steep, winding stairs to the emergency exit. I could hear the beast puppet thumping down the stairs behind me, moving with hollow thumps that made the suit sound like an empty shell. My legs and lungs were an inferno of pain, adrenaline barely helping as I ran further. The first floor was finally in sight below me as the beast grew nearer, only one turn behind me now. As I ran down the last flight, I hit the edge of a step and slipped, falling on my arse on the slick concrete. I rolled down the stairs, hearing my wrist crack as it hit the edge of another step. Landing face up at the bottom, I could see Caleb lowering from the ceiling, tears of terror in his eyes, and a scream trying to choke its way through his crushed larynx. He was coming lower, after me, skydiving down through the space between flights of stairs to draw me back up with him to whatever hell was awaiting. Shaking the daze from my head, I pulled myself up toward the red emergency door right there. As I finally pushed the handle, letting the magnet loose, an alarm began to blare in the building, shrill and painful in my ears. I didn't look behind me as I ran from the building. My wrist still hurts. I don't know if it's fractured or broken yet because I've been too terrified to leave my home. When I got out of the office building, I ended up walking home, aching the entire way from my fall down the stairs. Caleb had the car keys when he was taken, and the dumbass only parked a few feet down the street from the office. Fire trucks passed me on the way, probably checking out the alarm I triggered during my escape. I wouldn't be surprised if they run his plates and find out it's his car, but I'm doubtful they're going to find him. I hope he's at least dead already, the merciful option instead of being hung up or stuffed in a costume puppet like the two we found. If I can't get up the nerve, I'm going to call the cops. Maybe they can investigate. Worst case, I set my wrist and grab a can of gasoline so it doesn't happen to anyone else. God, I wish it had just been a furry workshop at this point. That would have been peaceful at least. Caleb is a fucking idiot, but he didn't deserve that. I hope he's at peace somehow. The woods were supposed to be a refuge. After everything that had happened, I just needed to get away. My life had been falling apart. Work stress, a messy breakup, and the overwhelming suffocation of city life. The decision to spend a weekend in a secluded cabin, far from everything, felt like the only way to breathe again. The first day had been exactly what I needed. I woke up to the sound of birds, the crisp air filling my lungs as I stepped outside with a cup of coffee. The trees stretched up to the sky, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. I spent the morning wandering the trails near the cabin, finding peace in the simplicity of nature, but that peace was short-lived. It started when I decided to go deeper into the woods. I wasn't worried about getting lost. I had my phone with GPS, a map, and I was confident in my sense of direction. Besides, I'd always been good at hiking, and the thrill of exploring uncharted paths was too tempting to resist. The deeper I went, the more the trees seemed to close in around me. The light filtering through the canopy grew dimmer, the air cooler. After a while, the trails became less distinct, overgrown with shrubs and brambles. I paused, realizing I hadn't seen a trail marker in some time. No big deal. I thought I'd just retrace my steps. But as I turned around, the woods felt different, more menacing. The path I'd come from seemed to vanish into the undergrowth. I tried not to panic. I took out my phone, only to find the GPS struggling to get a signal. The map app spun uselessly, and a cold trickle of fear ran down my spine. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. I needed to head back to the cabin. I walked in what I thought was the right direction, but nothing looked familiar. The trees all started to blend together, their branches reaching out like twisted arms. I picked up my pace, my breath coming faster, trying to ignore the creeping dread clawing at the edges of my mind. Then I heard it, a rustling in the bushes behind me. I froze, straining to listen. It could have been anything, a deer or a squirrel, but the noise was too deliberate, too careful. It was as if something was watching me, following me. "Hello!" I called out, my voice trembling. The rustling stopped. Silence fell over the woods, heavy and unnatural. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no reply. I took a step forward, and the rustling started again, closer this time. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I broke into a run, branches slapping against my face, my feet stumbling over roots and rocks. I didn't care about the direction anymore. I just needed to get away. But the rustling followed me, growing louder, more frantic. Whatever it was fast. I could feel its presence behind me, just out of sight. A low growl echoed through the trees, primal and hungry, and I knew then that I wasn't imagining things. Something was hunting me. My lungs burned as I ran, my legs screaming in protest, but I didn't dare stop. The trees blurred past, and the last of the daylight faded into twilight. I was running blind, my mind a whirlwind of terror and exhaustion. Then, out of nowhere, I tripped. My foot caught on something, and I went sprawling, skidding across the dirt and leaves. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment, I just lay there, gasping for breath. But I could hear it. Whatever was chasing me, it was close, too close. I forced myself up, pain shooting through my ankle, and looked around frantically. The rustling had stopped, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. My eyes darted through the darkened woods, searching for any sign of movement, but I saw nothing. The woods were deathly silent again. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the tree line, shrouded in shadow. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its head cocked to one side, as if studying me, and a wave of nausea hit me as I realized its eyes were glowing, a sickly, pale yellow. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to move. The creature stepped forward, its movements unnaturally smooth, almost like it was gliding. As it approached, I could see its features more clearly, or rather, the lack of them. Its face was a grotesque mockery of a human's, with skin stretched too tight over its skull, and its mouth, if you could call it that, was a jagged line that split its face in two. I scrambled backward, trying to put distance between us, but the creature didn't rush. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the fear radiating from me. Then it spoke. Its voice was a distorted echo, as if a dozen voices were speaking at once, some too high-pitched, others too deep. Lost, alone, afraid, it whispered, each word crawling under my skin, twisting my insides with dread. Why do you trespass? My voice failed me. All I could do was shake my head, tears streaming down my face. The creature leaned closer, its breath a foul stench of decay, and for a moment I was certain this was it. I was going to die out here, devoured by whatever this thing was. But then, something changed. The creature stiffened, its head snapping up as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Its glowing eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw something that looked like fear cross its twisted features. It turned its head, slowly scanning the woods around us, and I followed its gaze, though I didn't want to know what it was looking for. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping so rapidly that I could see my breath in the air. The trees around us creaked and groaned, their branches shaking as if buffeted by an invisible wind. And then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the ground, through my bones. It was deeper than anything I'd ever heard, more primal, more terrifying. The creature in front of me recoiled, taking a step back. Its glowing eyes darted around frantically, and for the first time, it looked unsure, even vulnerable. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing. Whatever had scared this thing, this monster, was far worse than it could ever be. The growl echoed again, closer this time, and the creature hissed in response. It turned back to me, its voice more frantic now, the distortion in its tone more pronounced. "Run," it said, its voice overlapping itself in a chaotic cacophony. "Run. Hide. Now." Without waiting for me to respond, the creature backed away, its form dissolving into the shadows as if it had never been there. I was alone again, but that sense of relief was fleeting. The growl was still there, louder now, reverberating through the trees, and I could feel something moving through the woods, something massive, something that made the ground tremble with each step it took. I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the pain in my ankle, and started to run. I didn't care where I was going anymore, I just needed to get away, to put as much distance between myself and whatever was coming. The woods were a blur around me, darkness closing in from all sides, but I kept moving, driven by pure, primal fear. The growl followed me, relentless, growing louder and louder, until it felt like it was right behind me. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the cold seeping into my bones, and I knew that if I stopped, even for a second, whatever was chasing me would catch me, and there would be no escape. I don't know how long I ran. Time had lost all meaning. My world reduced to the sound of my own heartbeat and the growl that stalked me through the woods. My legs were numb, my lungs burning, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't. And then suddenly, the trees thinned, and I burst out of the woods into a clearing. The sight of open sky, the stars overhead, was like a shock to my system. I stumbled forward, gasping for breath, my mind struggling to comprehend that I was out, that I had somehow made it through. But the growl, it was gone. The air was still, the woods behind me silent. I turned, half expecting to see something emerge from the trees, some monstrous form to come crashing through. But there was nothing, just the wind whispering through the leaves. I didn't trust it. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to not look back, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I collapsed onto the grass, my entire body trembling with exhaustion and fear. I was safe, I tried to tell myself. Whatever it was gone. But even as I sat there, staring back into the dark maw of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that something was still out there, lurking just beyond the edge of the trees, waiting for the right moment. And then I heard it, a voice, faint and distorted, carried on the wind. My own voice, calling out from deep within the woods, pleading, desperate. "Please, help, I'm lost." My blood turned to ice. It was unmistakable. My own voice, distorted and echoing through the trees. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. But there it was, drifting through the night air like a mocking whisper. "Please, help, I'm lost." The words repeated, each one hitting me with a wave of dread. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing again, but I couldn't force myself to move. It was like my legs were rooted to the ground, my mind paralyzed by the terror of what I was hearing. My voice, but not my voice. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. The woods were still, eerily quiet, but the voice kept coming, closer now, circling me as if something was moving through the trees, just out of sight. "Please, I'm scared, help me!" My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, hoping to use the flashlight to shine some light on the surrounding area, to see what was out there. But my phone, which had already failed me in the woods, flickered to life for only a moment before the screen went black, completely dead. I cursed under my breath, the last shred of control slipping away as the voice continued to circle me. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the shadows of the trees. It was too far away to make out any details, but the shape was familiar. It looked like me. No, not like me, it was me. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat as the figure mirrored my movements, stepping forward into the moonlight. I stared in disbelief as I saw my own face staring back at me, my own eyes, wide with terror, my own mouth forming those same desperate pleas. "Please, help, I'm lost." The words were wrong, twisted, like a recording played on a loop, and I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach that the figure wasn't quite right. Its movements were jerky, its features just slightly off, like someone trying to paint a picture from memory and getting the details wrong. The figure took another step closer, and as it did, its face began to change. The skin rippled, stretching, and the mouth split open into a grotesque grin that tore across its face. The eyes, which had once been a mirror of my own, glowed with a sickly yellow light. It wasn't me. It was the creature, the skinwalker, and it was using my voice, my face, to lure me in. I turned to run, but the moment I did, the air grew heavy again, that oppressive cold seeping back into the clearing. The growl returned, low and menacing, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. The skinwalker Flouncy, its grin faltering as it whipped its head around, searching the darkness. The growl was closer now, much closer, and I could feel the ground trembling with the weight of whatever was approaching. The skinwalker hissed, its distorted voice breaking into a cacophony of overlapping sounds, a frantic chorus of voices pleading, crying, screaming. It started to back away, but it was too late. The woods exploded with movement as something massive barreled out of the trees, crashing into the clearing with a force that knocked me off my feet. I hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of me, but I forced myself to look up. What I saw defied comprehension. It was a creature of darkness, a mass of shifting shadows and grotesque forms that writhed and twisted, never settling into a single shape. Eyes, dozens of eyes, glowed from within the mass, and a maw of jagged teeth opened wide, releasing that deep, primal growl that reverberated through the clearing. The skinwalker screamed, a sound that pierced the night, and it turned to flee, but the shadow beast was faster. It surged forward, tendrils of darkness shooting out, wrapping around the skinwalker, dragging it back into the depths of the woods. The last thing I saw of the creature that had been hunting me was its face, my face, twisted in a final, desperate scream before it was consumed by the darkness. And then, just like that, the clearing was silent. I lay there, too stunned to move, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The air was still, the oppressive cold lifting, but the fear didn't leave me. I knew I wasn't safe. Not yet. Whatever that thing was. It had taken the skinwalker, but it was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting. I forced myself to stand, my entire body trembling. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, had to find my way back to civilization, to safety. But the woods were vast, and I had no idea which way to go. I glanced back at the spot where the skinwalker had been taken, the ground disturbed, the grass flattened, but there was no sign of the creature or its predator. And then, from the darkness, I heard it. Not a growl this time, but a whisper, low and insidious, slithering into my mind. Run! It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. Without another thought, I turned and ran, sprinting across the clearing and into the woods. The trees closed in around me, the darkness thickening. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I didn't know what was behind me, but I knew I had to keep moving, had to get away. The whisper followed me, echoing through the trees, urging me on, and I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in a heap on the forest floor. I lay there, gasping for breath, waiting for the growl, for the whispers, for the darkness to claim me. But nothing came. The woods were silent again, the oppressive presence gone, and for the first time, I felt like I might actually survive this. I forced myself up, my body screaming in protest, and continued forward, walking through the night, praying that I would find the cabin, or at least the road, anything that would take me away from this nightmare. I don't know how long I walked, but eventually I saw a light in the distance. It was faint, but it was enough to renew my strength, to push me forward. I stumbled through the trees, my vision blurring with exhaustion and fear, until I broke through the undergrowth and found myself standing on a dirt road. The light was coming from a small cabin, not mine, but it didn't matter. I staggered toward it, every step an effort, and pounded on the door. A few agonizing moments passed before it opened, and a man stood there, his eyes wide with surprise and concern. "Please," I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. "Help me." He didn't hesitate. He pulled me inside, shut the door, and the warmth of the cabin washed over me, a stark contrast to the cold that had gripped the woods. I collapsed onto the floor, my body giving out, and darkness took me. When I woke, I was safe. The man had called for help, and I was taken to the hospital, treated for exhaustion and dehydration. They found my cabin, but they never found the creature or its predator. I didn't tell them what I had seen. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. But I knew the truth. Knew that the woods were haunted by more than just ancient trees and wildlife. There was something out there, something beyond human comprehension, and it was hunting the hunters. I left the city after that, moved far away, somewhere the woods were nothing more than a distant memory. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up to the sound of a low growl, or a whisper that slips through my mind like a cold breeze. And I know, deep down, that it's still out there, waiting, and one day it might come for me again. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.